this view. Okay, awesome. So tell the audience a little bit about who you are, your story, and a little bit, if you don't mind, sharing who you are outside of physical therapy.
Well, of course. Thank you for having me. Well, I guess the story starts. I actually was born in Weslaco, Texas, which is on the southern tip border of Texas and New Mexico. My dad worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they happened to have a station there. When I was 6 years old, we moved to Winter Park, Florida, which is just outside of Orlando. We moved because my dad got a different job, or got a job at the U.S. Department of Agriculture there. I was super bummed when we left Texas because I was just getting old enough to potentially have a horse, and we lived on 2 acres of land. And so there was this potential to get a horse, but then we moved to the suburbs of Florida. And that's where I grew up. I grew up all the way through, went through high school and everything there. I'm the daughter of 2 immigrant parents. My mom is Japanese. She was first generation born in Hawaii, and my dad was a naturalized citizen who was from Austria. And so had a very sort of eclectic background with, parents from both sides of the world, essentially. We did get to travel. We were lucky enough to travel a little bit. So I got to meet both sides of the family. And that's where I think, I probably developed my sort of global citizen sensibility early on. Growing up, I loved animals. I talked about horses. We had a menagerie.
Were you a Western or an English rider? I'm curious because I used to do horseback riding.
You know what? I have only rode Western, but I haven't ridden that much, even though I love horses. I still, to this day, have not gotten back into being able to, go horseback riding a lot, or even owning a horse. I know it's one of those little bucket list things. But I had a bunch of animals when we were growing up. I love telling the story of my dad brought home 2 eggs from the orange groves that we hatched in a makeshift aquarium that ended up being a baby alligator. And so we raised the baby. I know. We used to dangle little chicken pieces from chopsticks, and they would snap at them. And
very Florida thing, yes.
Very Florida thing, I think so. But we had birds, we had fish, we had cats, and so today I have 2 cats because we like to travel, so they're a little more self-sufficient. I was a tomboy, grew up in a neighborhood where there was a bunch of boys that we all kind of hung out together that were around my age. So it was a kind of a rough and tumble kid. Was an athlete through high school, lettering in multiple sports. And I have a brother. His name is Ralph. He lives in Chicago now. He owns his own law firm. So that kind of entrepreneurial vibe kind of ran through my family a little bit. Today, I guess my dad, who is really my lifelong mentor, passed away in 2018. But my mom now lives here where we live in Phoenix, Arizona, and she lives really close by. So, and finally, I'm also a mom to my extraordinary daughter, Ava. She's 9 years old, and she's going to be starting in 4th grade, this week.
Wow.
And we love the outdoors, avid paddleboarder, hiker, biker. That's one of the things that has happened through this whole COVID and shelter in place is that I've recently taken up mountain biking. So that's been really fun. And she's a big adventurer just like me and loves to travel. So we love kind of exploring new places and all kinds of new things.
Nice. I actually just bought a new mountain bike. I'm really excited. I just need a hatch for my car. But I'm excited for it. So that makes me excited to hear that you are going into mountain biking. I love it.
Yeah, it's been about 3 months now. And I'm taking it slow because as you probably know, we've seen our share of patients who have had injuries on mountain bikes. So I'm going slow and have a good teacher. So it's been really fun. Just have to do it super early in the morning here in Arizona because it gets hot fast.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And it's like dry heat too, right? It's not Florida like sticky heat.
No, it's very different from Florida for sure. It's dry heat, but you know, I always tell people just turn on your hair dryer, put it in front of your face, and that on high, and that's essentially what it feels like.
Yeah, that's rough. I'm in California, so I'm originally from New York and the whole East Coast. So coming out here and feeling like dry heat
Yep,
felt very unique, to say the least.
very different.
Very, very
Yep.
different.
Well,
And
I spent a
so,
lot of time in California as well. I went to UC Davis after high school. I ended up going to UC Davis in Northern California, just outside of, well, between Sacramento and San Francisco.
I just moved there. Yay! Hey!
Awesome.
Yeah, I'll be starting a PT school in fall.
Oh, very cool.
Thank you. Thank you. And so what kind of led you to physical therapy? What was that first experience? What was that first like curiosity moment?
Well, so when I left Florida to go play basketball at UC Davis, I entered university as a pre-med student. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and I was kind of on my way. And my junior year playing basketball, I went down with a knee injury that on MRI kind of looked like it could be a possible ACL tear, but it was inconclusive, so they didn't want to do surgery. And since my instability wasn't really that bad, they sent me to rehab. So they sent me to see a physical therapist. And I was familiar, obviously, with the athletic trainers because I spent a lot of time in the training room getting your ankles taped and so on. But this was really my first interaction with a physical therapist. And I had such an amazing therapist who took such great care of me. And my outcomes were amazing. I mean, I had a super speedy recovery in terms of being able to return that year wearing a brace and finished out the season with my team, and then was able to go on my senior year without wearing a brace, fully strong, no instability. Even setting a few scoring records that year, if I do say so myself. And so it really intrigued me to learn more about the profession. And at the time, you know, thinking about med school being another 10 years of time versus at that time, PT school was graduation 2 more years. I decided to pursue a degree in PT. And I went on to get my master's degree in physical therapy from the University of St. Augustine, which is in St. Augustine, Florida. And then I also had certifications in manual therapy, also from the University of St. Augustine, and then ended up getting my athletic training certification as well as my strength and conditioning certification as well. So those really steered me down the path of getting into sports medicine. And, you know, because I was an athlete, because I had really found the profession of PT through athletics, it was kind of my way of wanting to pay it forward. And it also was what, you know, I had a passion for, and, you know, felt very comfortable working with other athletes, could really relate to them and have that empathy that I feel like is really important to have for your patients. And then, you know, I went on to get my DPT in 2014 from Evidence in Motion. It was one of the things that I had promised my dad. He was the first in his family to get his PhD, which allowed him to be very successful with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And it was one of the things that he wished for his kids. So my brother had gotten his JD for as a lawyer, and so I went on to actually get my DPT as well. Which, you know, was a great experience through Evidence in Motion, because they had a program that was kind of geared more towards the business side, which we'll probably talk about a little bit later, of PT. So not only just from the clinical side, but also got that experience on the business side, which was really important to what I'm doing today.
Interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of the time we kind of think of the one track mind of what PTs can do, like I mentioned, and to hear that, like, hey, there's a whole different avenue that you can put yourself in. Like, we don't all have to be in the same category, and kind of just finding what fits for you. I guess as we go on, we'll kind of discover how you unravel that as we peel back the layers here a bit. But I think it's so fascinating to hear your journey of how you kind of got there, what was exposed to you that were like pretty much the precursors to web PT and your level of innovation and business mind.
Yeah, when I first started out in PT, I obviously sought out specifically trying to find clinics that were working with the population that I like to work with. But at the same time, you come out, of PT school as a generalist, and so not having significant experience or background outside of my own personal experience didn't lend to immediately being able to do whatever I wanted. And so, part of it was finding mentors within clinics that I worked in. And then also, I'll just say, raising your hand and volunteering for things that, you found interest in. So there was an opportunity to work with the Ladies Professional Golf Association, or the LPGA. It entailed a little bit of a travel, so some of the other therapists weren't able to do that. But I was one of the first to raise my hand, and man, was that an amazing experience. Not as glamorous as you might think, a lot of grind and long hours, but really honed my expertise in multiple different diagnoses for a very specialized group of athletes. And then, with that, ended up being able to work with other athletes, including Phoenix Roadrunners, which was a hockey team here in town. And then the clinic that I was a clinic director for, we also worked with a lot of professional athletes from Major League Baseball. So we did a lot of work with the Cubs and the Angels. And those are one of the benefits of, being here in Arizona. You have a lot of access to or a little more access to teams with regard to sports medicine, to teaching them skills and fundamentals that will hopefully prevent them from having further injury in the future, doing a lot of education with parents. All those things I think really are important parts of PT that people don't always think about. Like you said, and we kind of get this tunnel vision of, okay, I'm here to treat a knee. But for me, it's always been about treating the entire patient, right?
Yeah. As in, like, not only just the whole body, but the entire patient as a human being is so impactful, because those that are watching, like, you are not your own entity. You are, parts of your family, parts of your friends, that those relations that make you, those interactions that basically mold and shape you to who you are. So that's a really, really great point, Heidi. And so the population that you were working with, when you first got out, was it strictly athletes, or did you go like the general route first? What was that journey for you?
My very first, so I was lucky enough to have, right after graduating from UC Davis, I was actually working in a clinic that was owned by a company called NovaCare. And they had a scholarship program for a couple of different universities, and I was, and one of them happened to be the Institute of Physical Therapy, or now known as the University of St. Augustine. And so I was lucky enough to get one of those scholarships to go. And one of the parts of that scholarship was that after PT school, you had to work for NovaCare in clinics that they had opportunities for therapists to work in. So my very first job was that I worked in for about 9 months in right out of school in Florida, was in a post-rehab facility in which the majority of patients were either total knee, total hip, total joint patients. So it was post-operative for sure, which is similar to when you get into athletics. A lot of what you do is post surgical patients, but obviously population age for the most part significantly different. So that was my very first position, and then as I had gone to college on the West Coast, I kind of had developed this affinity towards the West Coast and wanted to get back to California initially.
I tell you, it's tricky once you're here.
They didn't really have any positions open, and so I decided to plant a flag in Arizona, which was only supposed to be for a year because I had a year of repayment that I had to do. I had to work for them for another year before I had, basically essentially paid off my scholarship. And so I decided to come to Arizona, and my first clinic that I worked in specialized in workman's compensation. So again, very different. Got to see a lot of patients. I grew up, when I was in Texas, I went to a Spanish immersion preschool. And so my dad had spoken like 4 languages. And so I kind of had that linguistic ability. And then when I was in high school, I was lucky enough to take a lot of Spanish courses. So I was bilingual in Spanish. And so I got to utilize those skills, which helped me a lot with that population, especially here in Arizona. Again, one of those things you raise your hand for because you can be helpful and also you're learning a lot at the same time. And then NovaCare decided that they wanted to try it. And I worked for that clinic for about 2 years, and they wanted to try a new concept inside of a junior college. And they needed someone who was an athletic trainer, so that it was a clinic inside of a junior college that would treat all of the athletes and then as well all of the faculty and staff of the university.
That's pretty cool. I did something similar in undergrad.
Yeah. And so it was kind of the first of its kind, and here, at least in Arizona. And they so they tapped me to at least get it started. Because I had a relationship with one of the physicians that was actually the team doctor for that university, or for the community college. So I ended up starting that practice and hiring, the first couple of employees that we actually made were the athletic trainers, and we started getting patients, and we grew that practice to be pretty big. And so from there, so that really started me down the path of really hyper focused on working mainly with athletes, 80% of the time. And really was my passion at that point, especially lower extremity, post-operative knees, for obvious reasons, because I felt very secure in understanding that and the anatomy and everything. And then also worked with a physician who had been one of the premier physicians in arthroscopic hip surgery. So that also became one of my specialties as I started narrowing my focus in the types of patients that would get onto my schedule.
So what was that transition from kind of traditional PT realm to business PT realm?
Well, I had been practicing for about 15 years, had moved my way up to clinic director. I was a clinic director for over 3 clinics, one of the largest sports medicine clinics in Arizona. And, honestly, it was based out of a need that I had in my practice because we were documenting on pen and paper. We were doing a lot of dictation and transcription for all of the notes that we were sending to our referring physicians and insurance companies, et cetera. And it was one of the largest expenses on my P&L. And so as I was talking to a lot of our referring physicians, they had been talking about how they were now starting to transition into using a digital platform, and it was saving them money, and they thought that it was somewhat efficient. And so I thought, well, there had to be something out there for therapists too. And when I went and looked out to see what was available, everything was ridiculously expensive. It was all server based, so I would have to, have my own servers. And, at that point in time, I was definitely not technology savvy.
It was expensive too, y'all. It was so expensive.
I know. I mean, you think of it's so funny how much has transitioned in such a short period of time. And then the 12 years that we've been around since 2008, it's been a complete 180 degrees and within my own profession. And I'm really proud to say that, we have been a leader in making that transition for PTs. But part of it was the Affordable Care Act that happened, and the HITECH Act, which really pushed healthcare in general to move towards this digital documentation and getting everything digitally transformed. we were the very first to launch a web-based platform in PT.
She's
And
a
I'm
boss,
getting
you
ahead
guys.
of myself
Like
because
a boss.
just the transition from, being a therapist, having a problem, and then trying to figure out a solution. I didn't do that by myself. I happened to be dating a technologist at the time who had built large scale enterprise software, and he helped me look at what was out there, and basically came back scratching his head like, what is going on in healthcare, what's going on in PT, like you guys are so ass backwards, like all these other industries are so far ahead, like what's going on? And so we decided to put our heads together to build something originally that was just supposed to be for my practice.
Wow.
And we started getting positive feedback. It took us about 9 months to build version 1, which was only a documentation platform, just so our therapists could get away from doing transcription and dictation. And then, this was in 2008 or 2007, and we did a little bit of market research, and we found at that point in time that 80% of physical therapists were still documenting on pen and paper. So light bulb goes off, meaning that my problem was ubiquitous with the entire industry. This wasn't just something that I was dealing with. There was a lot of practices across the country that were dealing with it. So we decided to launch the company in February of 2008. We sold 5 clinics that very first month. And then you advance to where we are today, and we have, close to over 15,000 practices, 40% market share. Pretty much everybody's heard of the brand WebPT today. So it's been an amazing, amazing ride. But getting back to your question, the transition from clinical PT, clinic director, even though, I had done a lot on the business side in terms of being a clinic director with P&L responsibilities, budgeting, hiring, recruiting, like all of those things, I was not technology savvy, so trying to jump into a whole different world of different nomenclature and language was a really hard transition. It took me about a year, but something clicked about 9 months in, and it was really about the essence of why we become a physical therapist. And I became a physical therapist because I love helping people. I wanted to help other athletes like I had been helped. To get back to what I love to be doing. And when I recognized that I could help so many more people by helping my peers who then would be helping so many patients, that was really sort of the epiphany that it took me to really dive in with both feet and say, oh my gosh, like this is my calling. Like this is really where I need to put my efforts and of course my passion behind. And so that really helped me to make that transition away from clinical care, which I loved and still do love. I still have, employees that come in and say, oh my God, I did something to my shoulder this weekend. Could you please take a look?
Like riding a bike, just getting on that bike again.
Yes. And I've kept my license up to date with CEUs and everything else. Because anytime anybody asks me, even today, 12 years later after starting a tech company and being a tech exec, what do you do? My first response is always, I'm a physical therapist who happened to start a technology company.
I love it. I think you hit something for me when you just said like, I'm helping so many of my peers that will help other people. That's huge.
Yeah.
That's so impactful. And the idea that you've impacted so many people's life, it's just like a trickle down, right? It goes from one point to another, and it's just a domino effect essentially. And that's so huge. That just impacted me in a very unique way. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And it's really something about entrepreneurship that I think a lot of times people can get stuck in, of thinking small. And I think it goes back to your point of our narrow focus as physical therapists sometimes, that allowing yourself to think bigger allows you to have a much more innovative and have, see the world a little bit differently, to where there may be more opportunities than just what is right in front of you. And so that epiphany really also helped me just as an individual to take that same mindset of thinking bigger in lots of decisions and lots of, ways of how we run our company, how we think about culture operationally, but also just in my own personal life of what your day-to-day kind of consists of and your goals for yourself and things like that. So it's a little more kind of, it can get deep if you let it.
I totally agree. I think, like you said, entrepreneurship, just thinking in that mind of what you said earlier, like I saw a problem. It's like, okay, what identify that, and then like figuring out a solution to that, right? And just problem solving and challenging yourself, right? Like you mentioned, you didn't go to school for tech. You didn't go to school for tech, Heidi, and here you are, major company, and it just took that minute of, or not minute to understate, but taking that time to really evaluate, like, hey, this isn't just me struggling with this issue. And if it's not just you struggling with this issue, it goes right on par with your why. I think that why of a PT is so important. Like you mentioned, I want to help people. That's the bottom line. If you're doing it in a really unique way, great, kudos, and you just get to serve so many more people.
That's right. And, I think there's so much opportunity. Sometimes we pigeonhole ourselves into thinking that clinical care is the only way that we can serve as physical therapists. There are a lot of non-clinical PTs making such huge impacts out there, whether it's, on ESPN or if it's, in major investment firms. I mean, I love that when people still keep their PT sort of identity, even when they're outside of the clinical kind of arena.
Yeah. And I think it's not only, I want the students to realize this is not only healthcare. Like a doctorate is a terminal degree. Terminal, right? That's it. You're done after that. And then you can really venture out and make it whatever you want. Like you can essentially design and cultivate whatever you want for your life, whatever you want for your profession, right? And you don't have to stick into one mold. And that's really what I want to try and break that mold of what pre-PTs are exposed to, right? Because I know personally, I wanted to be a PT since I was in the 8th grade. And it was a very long journey. And so I started to look around. I was like, is this it? Is this I want to explore a little bit more. And I felt almost stifled a little bit because I didn't see anything else out there. And I want to expose so many other students to that. So like there are so many other different avenues, different possibilities. So you don't have to feel trapped, right? Because I'm the type of person, Heidi, I don't like doing what everyone else is doing. Okay. I like to branch out. I like to explore. I like to take that path that's all rockety and roady. You know what I'm talking about. You do the mountain climbing, you do the mountain biking, And so that was just me and my personality. And I was like, I really do genuinely love the field. I love movement. I love helping people in that healthcare space. What else is there for me? And so for students to see the variety that really is the beauty of physical therapy, and not feel pinned down and not feel like they only have to do one track or the 2 tracks that mainstream society shows.
Totally agree. And you nailed it when you said at the essence of what we do is problem solving. And problem solvers are needed in every industry. And so if you apply that, even the initial exam sort of subjective, objective assessment and plan sort of methodology to lots of things, like anything really, you're gonna be a great problem solver. And I can tell you just from our company at where we are today at 600 employees, we always, no matter what role you're in, whether you're a biller or you're a project manager or you're a coder or, in the R&D department, we're looking for problem solvers. And so that kind of core part of what it means to be a PT can be utilized anywhere in any industry.
Yeah, you hit it right on. Like just you're already trained in that mindset. PT school PT school trains you to be a problem solver. The next step now is to allow yourself the space for creativity, for innovation, for learning more, you know, learning and exploring and being just curious, I think is the word I'm looking for. Just being curious and looking at things in a different way. I think is absolutely huge. So you nailed it right on the head. So with all this innovation and all these things that were coming to you at that time, what were the biggest hurdles for you? I know you mentioned not being the tech mindset, but what were the big, like, that big hurdle that you had to jump over, whether that be your own internal fears, whether that be trying to, you know, outreach to different clinics? What was that for you?
So one of them was just my own internal fears, right? Was my workflow, what I was doing in my practice, was that really going to resonate and transfer to other therapists out there and how they were doing work, right? Because when you're in a clinic, you know what you're doing. And yes, do you talk to other people? Sure. But your day to day is essentially your workflow, right? And so the fear of being ridiculed, or, you know, when you're producing something for your own profession that you've committed your life to, or your profession to, essentially for me, it was part of my identity, right? And so if I wanted to put something out to the industry, I wanted it to work. Like, I wanted it to be something that would truly help people. And so that hurdle initially of being confident enough to just put it out to the market and test it without thinking that it had to be everything to everyone was a really important lesson that I now talk a lot about with entrepreneurs, to just get it out there. Because feedback, whether it's positive or negative, and a lot of times negative feedback is actually going to be better for you, because you're going to learn from that negative feedback. You don't learn a lot from positive feedback, although it helps you to know that you're moving in the right direction. The improvements in how you enhance products and things that you could be doing differently based on some of the negative feedback is really how you grow and improve a product. And so that initial kind of fear of, well, is it good enough? Is it good enough? I had to get over pretty quickly to just get it started and start getting that feedback loop going. Having just graduated from PT school, but 12 years ago, we were just starting to kind of do our banking online. Smartphones were still just starting to come out. We had just had the iPad was started being utilized pretty readily. And so convincing people that it was okay to put your medical records on a web-based application was huge, right? And so this transference of, okay, well, you're doing it in your personal life with your banking, like, it's going to be okay if you do it in your clinic with your patient information. And so we had to do, which has been it was such a tremendous blessing now, because we get a lot of credit for really building two companies. We built a tech company, a software company, but at the same time, we built this tremendous education and advocacy force within WebPT as well. And, we had to educate people on what it meant to be web-based. I mean, we had people asking us all the time, well, what do you mean the cloud? Like, what does that mean? Like, PTs just were like me. They weren't tech savvy.
Right. And so and this was innovative at the time. Like, I remember like when cloud was just starting, and it was so abstract to even explain to people. Yeah. So Yeah.
And so that, and the fact that you could just log in and it would appear, and like all of those things, like we had to do a ton of education. And so that is now one of the foundations and hallmarks of our organization today. But getting that engine started was, and recognizing like, oh my gosh, like, we just have to educate people, and they will, if once they kind of understand, they'll understand the innovation as well. And that really is exactly what happened. So many of the early adopters that jumped on with us, a lot of them still customers, or what we call members today. were just amazing as they then started educating others and being advocates for us as well. So those are probably,
But what would you give, like, any advice to someone that is interested in getting involved in the business and tech side of physical therapy or healthcare in general?
Sure. Well, I guess I would start out by saying, just because my innovation story sort of came through the route of technology doesn't mean that everybody's innovation story has to take that path. Although it certainly could. There are plenty of ways to innovate using technology, whether it's telehealth, which is now becoming a norm, outcomes tracking, patient engagement, all of those things require technological services. But there are also other ways to innovate as well. In fact, there are new fields of physical therapy emerging all the time, fields like within the performing arts, or you think about the obesity management, or even animal therapy. It's pretty amazing. There's a whole subsection group that's now starting to treat animals. So I guess, it goes back to what we were talking about before, identifying the need. And if it's something you're really, really passionate about, well, go for it, fill it, try to find a solution for it. Earlier, having PTs represented in other fields like technology or marketing or anywhere in the business world, provides so much credibility for us as a profession, and more people understanding the education that we have, the understanding that we have, the problem solving skills that we have. So I guess with that in mind, I would just really reflect on the problems that people are facing on a daily basis, and problems maybe that you might notice that others are facing, whether it's your patients or your peers, and think about ways that you could maybe do that differently. And being an innovative thinker doesn't always have to mean that you're an entrepreneur. You can fix things within your practice or try things, on a smaller scale. One of my favorite sort of quotes is by Steve Jobs, and the quote is, "Innovation distinguishes between a leader and a follower." And so, I think there's so many ways to innovate within healthcare. It's been ripe. It still is ripe for disruption. There's so many things that are still behind with regard to healthcare in general. But it really takes a lot of patience, a viable idea or product, a lot of grit and passion, and, also timing. It's all about timing and being the right place, right time. So finding mentors, being a continuous learner, as you mentioned earlier, and really, really staying laser focused on solving the problem at hand are things that, I think would be really important for anyone who's interested in sort of getting creative and innovative within the field of PT.
Yeah, I think what you said was huge. It was like that focus has to be laser, like you said, especially in today's day and age where information is everywhere. Like, you can get all the information you need, but if it's too much information, you can get sidetracked all over the place. And just that level of curiosity, like you mentioned, and continued learning. Like, continuing education doesn't have to necessarily be PT specific, right? Even though it is great, I think just being a well-rounded, diverse as well is also really important. So a couple last questions here before we wrap up is what keeps you motivated?
Well, meeting people like you, to be honest, young, amazing PTs who are just kicking ass and taking names and trying to continue to push this profession forward in new, innovative ways. Our web PTers, all of our employees and our team members inspire me every single day. People within our organization who have really gotten behind our mission and vision and love this profession just as much as I do, and they're not even PTs or rehab therapists, PTs, OTs, or speech therapists. And then, seeing the tremendous impact that we are having on the entire rehab therapy community has just been amazing. Like I swear, I still have to pinch myself some days when, it seems like such a short period of time that we were still a couple of founders in the back of that coffee shop, literally trying to get our first customers, So even though it was like super hard to leave my role as that, practicing PT and embrace this sort of technology world, it's been obviously one of the best decisions I've ever made. And there's still so much more to do, and I'm motivated every day when I wake up to just help more people and more therapists and more clinics achieve greatness in practice, which is part of our mission.
That makes me so happy, because I've spoken to a lot of pre-PTs, and they're like, the PT I'm shadowing like tells me like they hate their job and they're miserable and all this other stuff. So to hear that you are still inspired after all these years, and still doing the thing and inspiring other people, it just really makes me happy.
Well, so it's a really good lesson, Aisha. I'm not doing what I was doing 15 years ago. I've reinvented myself so many different times throughout my career, whether it was from working in that, rehab hospital, working with workman's comp patients, then going on to treat athletes and, traveling on the road, trying that out. Like, there's so many opportunities in PT, even just within the specialties that we offer within our profession, that coming out as a generalist gives you a lot of opportunity to try different things and try new things. Then honing my leadership skills and moving into clinic directorship and understanding more of the business side, right? And then, making the decision to jump into tech. But even within WebPT over the last 12 years, being a lifelong learner and being willing to try things that are outside of my comfort zone, for me, is what makes me happy, right? Of that constant ability to learn new things, expand your horizons, if you will, continue to think bigger, as we started this conversation with. Those are all things that drive me. So understanding you as an individual and what drives you, what motivates you, really important as you start your career, so that you can find those things. And I think it's super unfortunate. We talk a lot about, and it's a big problem in our industry, that their PT students are incurring a tremendous amount of debt, so that when they come out of school, the mindset is not, well, where can I be the best therapist? It's, well, where do I get paid enough so that I can pay off my student loans, right? And that's not always the job that's going to make you the happiest. So you got to endure that for a while. And there's a lot of burnout that's happening within our industry. And we talk a lot about it because we've done a state of rehab therapy industry report that gets published annually. We've done it for the last 4 years, and we've been watching the student debt, we've been watching the burnout numbers, and they're ever increasing, unfortunately. So, there's a lot to say about trying to figure out and solve some of those bigger problems to allow, the downstream effect of not having the burnout, having more therapists who are happier. Yeah. But it's not new. This is something that's been going on for a long time in terms of our reimbursement, our status in healthcare. Like, I don't know. For me, it's also about just not considering PT a job, that this is a career, right? That you are invested in it and you need to advocate for the entire industry, and that helping people thing comes to helping your peers as well as your patients. Like, all of that put together is what motivates me and what really helps to keep me happy, right? And finding new ways to inspire myself with new areas. And sometimes I think people don't always feel like there's those opportunities, but you have to go out and seek them yourself, but also know at the end of the day, what inspires you, what motivates you, and then finding those paths.
That's huge. I think a lot of the student debt and everything is going to start to, I don't know, it's going to start to shift things in a different way, because I think a lot of students feel frustrated by that system. But I think it's also giving a different avenue of which PTs will start to kind of navigate. So with your insight, where do you personally see PT going? Where do you see that going in the future?
Well, as a profession,
Correct.
I still think that has a very bright future. The population is not getting any younger. There's still a lot of patients to see. As a matter of fact, we like to talk about the 90% in which, clinics across the US are only seeing 10% of the people who have some sort of diagnosis that a therapist could help. And so if we could just move that needle 10%, right, we would double the number of patients that would be coming in that would have access and that we could help, and we could save the downstream costs and all of the great benefits that PTs have. And so that's really a big area that we're trying to make inroads with, that we think that PTs can really make a difference. Obviously with COVID and some of the changes that have happened just even over the last 9 months, there's going to be some transition in how we treat patients, whether it's this hybrid model of some virtual visits and in-person visits. I don't think we'll ever get away from having in-person visits, because our hands-on techniques are really, at the end of the day, what differentiates us as providers, and the techniques and methods that we use to help people in that way. But I do think it'll be less. I think that there'll be some more of the sort of managed care and visit limitations. Technology is going to play a significant is going to be more of a factor moving forward in terms of analytics and data driving more of our decisions versus anecdotally some of the decisions that are made today, and just whatever the physician writes on the script is how many visits the patient gets seen. But rather than that, truly knowing based on this diagnosis, these comorbidities, and this patient's motivation and goals, like these are the number of visits that we should be able to treat this patient in. I would like to see a little bit less variation in care, so that we are a lot more streamlined in understanding when you go to a PT in California and you go to a PT in New York for the same diagnosis, that you're going to get treated essentially the same, and similar techniques, similar, maybe not necessarily all the similar nomenclature, but similar techniques, so that people understand and patients understand and know what to expect when they walk into a PT practice. Unfortunately, today that's not the case, and that leads to a lot of anomalies and data that is different across the U.S. and nothing streamlined. So with consolidation that's happening, the pendulum swung a couple of times during my 20 plus years of being a PT. It's swinging back now to more consolidation, a little more larger practices that are sort of leading the charge in this area. But, that's going to be, for me, that I think those are areas that need to improve and that will have to improve for us to continue to be viable as a profession.
Yeah, those are factors that I, as a pre-PT in my state, I wouldn't have even factored in. So thank you for that insight. And then last question here. So Heidi, if you were to start your pre-PT journey right now with all the knowledge that you have, what would you do? What would you be doing to set yourself up for success is rather what I should be saying.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I wouldn't hesitate to restart a PT journey. I know that, I read a lot on Twitter and blogs and things like that, and there's a lot of negative feedback right now about whether or not you should even go down this journey as a PT, and I would still do it. But there are things that I might do a little different. And in order to set yourself up for success, I would say, first and foremost, take some time to really understand the business side of PT. It's incredibly important for you to understand how you as a therapist get paid. How does a clinic or a hospital or wherever your employer make money in order for you to get paid? How do insurances work? What are some of the basic of understandings of running a business? Because too often I think we're so focused on the clinical care side, and we go in and we demand these types of salaries, and we don't understand why there's these goals that are set for us for numbers of visits and why we need to charge this much. And all of those things are incredibly important for a business to be viable. Now, do some people go with the extreme and entice and incentivize things that are probably not in the best interest of patients? Sure. But if you don't understand that portion of it, you'll never understand the why behind it. So that would be one of my first things. And I learned that later in my career, but also had some mentors early on that helped me in understanding more about that, at least giving me some of the terminology of, understanding, price per visit, cost per visit, things like that, that were important as I continued on my career journey.
Yeah, I think a lot of student PTs learn that in PT school, and it's almost like a dabble, and then real life hits, and they're like, go.
Yeah. And I know there's so much to learn, but I guess when you're getting your first couple of, first jobs, like asking some of those questions and asking those questions to the clinic director, asking those questions to the clinic owner or to the hospital administrator that you're working with are really important to understand of how does this whole system work that we're immersed in on a daily basis. Yeah. The next thing I would say is probably really focus on building connections, surrounding yourself with people who inspire you, challenge you, and most importantly, a diverse set of people who think differently than you. Especially we've always thought about this in our company. We talk about it as cognitive diversity, and it's so much more than when you generally think about diversity. You think about gender and ethnicity and race, but so much more with experience and where you come from, and all of those things affect how you think. And growth really isn't achieved by only building networks of individuals who think and act just like you do. Right. And so diversifying, as we've talked about, not only having friends who are PTs, but friends who are in other industries, and really asking questions and learning about what they do and why they do it. Because a lot of those same principles can be applied into the physical therapy industry as well.
Yeah.
And then
even the collaborative effort that you said too.
What's that?
Even the collaborative effort that you mentioned earlier about just merging healthcare and tech too.
Well, yeah. And, that it kind of really goes into my last thing in terms of the collaboration is that part of what has held us back as therapists, as rehab therapists or PTs specifically, is that we have kind of insulated ourselves and not been collaborative with other professions. So, we see athletic trainers as the enemy. We see massage therapists as the enemy. All of these people that are encroaching on our sort of treatment goals or treatment methods. And, at the end of the day, if we think about it from a patient first perspective, which is how we should be thinking about it, that collaborative effort to get what the patient needs and what's really going to get them back on track is at the end of the day, the most important thing. So focusing on practicing to the top of your license with evidence-based practice, meaning utilizing best practices in treatment techniques and protocols, but also making sure you're using data such as patient outcomes to help drive your clinical decision making, I think is going to be extremely important. And as we mentioned early, of treating that whole patient, right? So much of true healing goes beyond just the joint mobilization or exercise routine that we're teaching and instructing in. And not being afraid to work collaboratively with other disciplines to address whatever comorbidities that patient may have, and really get that patient truly healthy for the long term and back on track, is what I would say. We have such a huge opportunity to help the overall healthcare system reduce cost. But also at the end of the day, we're trying to improve patient outcomes, and get people back to doing what they love to do. So that's what I would say is, if I had to go back and do it again, if someone had told me some of those things early on, they're really still inspiring to me today and what I strive to do as a non-clinical PT. So hopefully those will be helpful to your audience as well.
That was helpful, I would imagine, from our audience and me as well. Like that just gave me a couple of extra sparks to hopefully what I'll be doing later this year. So I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I'm going